Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to explain to you how to write a setting description, and this lesson is aimed at children in grades 3 to 6, so Key Stage 2. So I'm going to cover what a setting is. We're going to look at an example of a setting description. We're going to look at the structure of a setting and also the language features of a setting, and then we're going to practice writing our own setting descriptions, and I will give you a checklist of things to try and include in your own setting description. So first of all, what is a setting? I've got a sentence there that's defining what a setting is, but I've missed out the two most important words. So you can pause the video and try and work out what the missing words are. It says the setting of a story is the and that the events occur. So pause the video while you try and work out what the missing words are. Okay, it's the time and the place of a story. The setting is the time and the place. So in our story, when you think of our story hill, the typical structure of a story. You have your opening, which is where you often have your character description and your setting description. So that's where we'd usually find our setting description, towards the beginning of the story. Then you've got your build-up, which is where a problem is introduced. You've got your climax in the middle, which is where there's lots of suspense and drama and excitement as the problem gets worse and is explored. Then you've got your resolution, when the problem is resolved. And then finally, at the end of a typical story, you have your characters reflecting on what they've learned and how things have changed since the beginning. But we're today just focusing on the setting description, which will come somewhere towards the beginning of the story, because it's important that your readers can create a picture in their minds of what we can see, hear, feel and smell in that place. So when you're writing a setting description, I want you to use your senses and think about, if you were in that place, what would you be able to see? What would you be able to hear? What would you be able to feel? And what would you be able to smell? And use those to write a setting description that's really detailed and that allows the reader to create a clear picture in their minds of what they would be able to see, hear, feel and smell if they were in that place. So here is an example of a setting description. I'm going to read it to you, and whilst I'm reading it, I want you to think about where I have described what we can see, where I've described what we can hear, where I've described what we can feel, and where I've described what we can smell. So after I've read it, you can pause the video while you try and find all that information. Okay, so it says, I had come to the edge of the land. In front of me, the calm grey flat sea stretched out as far as I could see. Its surface shone like a mirror. Just off the shore, surrounded by the icy water, a lonely little cottage stood on a tiny island. All around it, the grey, cloudy sky blocked out the sun. It was as cold as if I had been standing in a freezer, and the air around me was as silent as in the Arctic. The only sound came from the occasional splashing of fish in the water. As I stared at the little house in the middle of the lonesome patch of land, I noticed a smoky burning smell in the air. It was the scent of someone cooking breakfast. Okay, so pause the video and try and pick out where I've described what we can see, what we can hear, what we can feel, and what we can smell. Okay, so here I have highlighted the different parts. In blue, we've got descriptions of what we can see. In yellow, we've got description of what we can feel. In reddy orange, we've got a description of what we could hear or not hear, as the case may be. And in the purpley pink colour at the bottom, we've got a description of what we can smell. So what we can see, it says, in front of me, the calm grey flat sea stretched out as far as I could see. Its surface shone like a mirror. I'm using similes to describe what I can see. Just off the shore, surrounded by the icy water, A lonely little cottage, lonely describing the cottage, that's personification, making the cottage seem like it's a person, stood on a tiny island. All around it, the grey, cloudy sky blocked out the sun. That is all description of what we could see if we were in that place. In yellow, we've got what we could feel. I was as cold as if I had been standing in a freezer. Another simile there to describe what we could feel in that place. The air around me was as silent as in the Arctic. That is what we could hear or not hear. And again, I've used a simile, silent as in the Arctic. The only sound came from the occasional splashing of fish in the water. Splashing is onomatopoeia because it's a sound word. So you might use sound words to describe what you could hear in that particular place. And a lot of the sound words are onomatopoeic. And then at the bottom it says, as I stared at the little house in the middle of the lonesome patch of land, I noticed a smoky, burning smell in the air. It was the scent of someone cooking breakfast. So there we've got description of what we could smell in that place. So the structure of a setting description usually starts with the most obvious, important information first, and then you make it so that with each sentence you describe smaller and smaller, more specific details. But your first sentences should help the reader create a quick picture of this particular setting. So usually you'll tell them what the landscape is. Are we at the beach? Are we in a forest? Are we looking at mountains? Where are we? And then as you work through the setting description, you can describe more and more smaller details, more specific parts. We also tend to begin with descriptions of what we can see, as they tend to be the most obvious details to us and the most important details to help us imagine that place. And then later on, we start describing what we could feel, hear, or smell. Moving on now to the language features. When you're writing description, as you would be in a setting description, of course, we often want to use longer, more detailed descriptive sentences. So our sentences will often include things like fronted adverbials, adjectives and adverbs. Remember, adjectives describe nouns, adverbs describe verbs. You'll use powerful verbs, and you might use some conjunctions to add on extra detail. Later on in the story, when you're building suspense, you want to use short, snappy sentences because that helps speed up the pace. But with descriptive parts of the story, the longer, more detailed sentences are used to help us create those pictures in our heads, to help us imagine the setting. So, fronted adverbials are an important language feature of setting descriptions. They come at the front of a sentence, that's why they're called fronted adverbials, and they describe where, when, how, or why the verb happened. They are adverbs, but often they are adverbial phrases, so they're a whole group of words describing the verb. So, for example, a where fronted adverbial might be in the forest. In the forest, the mother owl left the nest. That tells us where she did it. Where did the mother owl leave the nest? In the forest. You could have a when fronted adverbial. When did she do that? At night. At night, the mother owl left her nest. At night tells us when she did the verb. You could have a how fronted adverbial, and these adverbs usually end in ly. Adverbs typically end in ly, and when we use them at the front of our sentence, we're using a how fronted adverbial. So silently, the mother owl left her nest. That tells us how she did it. How did she leave her nest? Silently. We can also use fronted adverbials to tell us why somebody did something. Because she needed to hunt, the mother owl left her nest. Why did she leave her nest? Because she needed to hunt. So they've been put at the front of the sentence, and notice that fronted adverbials are followed by commas, and they give us extra information about the verb, either telling us where, when, how, or why the verb happened. So have a look at this mini setting description and see if you can pick out where I've used fronted adverbials. You can pause the video now whilst you try and find them, and then I'll go through the answer in a moment. Okay, so fronted adverbials, we have got in front of me. In front of me lay a beautiful shimmering lake filled with water that shone like a mirror. In front of me is the fronted adverbial. It tells us where that happened. Behind the lake is another fronted adverbial, again telling us where. Where did the tremendous, tall, towering mountains stretch up to the sky? Behind the lake. In the sky, another where fronted adverbial tells us where the glistening moon and stars twinkled like diamonds. Where did they do that? In the sky. On the grass, another where fronted adverbial telling us where the majestic deer sipped from the crystal clear blue water, whilst fireflies swooped and sparkled all around. And then we've got another one all around the lake, another where fronted adverbial telling us where the fresh, luscious green bushes and grass, where the fresh, luscious green bushes grew. So there are fronted adverbials. In a setting description, we will also try to use powerful verbs. These are action words that describe what is being done, what is happening. So we can try and use more powerful, more specific verbs when writing description, because they help the reader create a clearer picture of how something was done. So instead of using said, we might say whispered. Instead of saying went, we might say rushed. Show how it gives more information about how things were done. So have a look at the same setting description and see if you can pick out the powerful verbs on this page. You can pause the video whilst you try and find them, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so our verbs, we've got lay, we've got filled with water, we've got shone like a mirror, we've got the mountain stretched is a powerful verb. We've got stars twinkled like diamonds. Twinkled is a powerful verb. We've got a deer sipped, a majestic deer sipped from the crystal clear blue water. Sipped is our powerful verb. We've got swooped, fireflies swooped and sparkled. Swooped and sparkled are both verbs. Grew is a verb, and covered is a verb. Another language feature that's important to use lots of in setting descriptions are adjectives and adverbs. So adjectives describe nouns, for example, beautiful, large, old, wooden, and adverbs describe verbs. So they describe how we do something. Remember, adverbs often end in ly. So we've got words like carefully, happily, sleepily, loudly, suddenly, describing how the verbs occurred. So look through the setting description again. Can you pick out any adverbs? You can pause the video now whilst you try and find them. So this setting description actually uses lots of similes to describe how the verbs were done. So, for example, shone like a mirror. Like a mirror is an adverbial phrase. It tells us how the water shone. We have got we've got lots of adjectives like glistening, describing the moon, or twinkled like diamonds. Like diamonds, there's describing how they twinkled, so that's an adverbial phrase. Adjectives, we've got beautiful, shimmering, tremendous, tall, towering. There's alliteration there as well, because all those words begin with the same sound. Majestic deer, crystal clear blue, describing the water. fresh, luscious green, adjectives describing the bushes. Pretty pink, describing the flowers. So lots of adjectives and a few adverbial phrases. The next language feature that I think is really important to use lots of when you're writing description would be conjunctions. So we use conjunctions to add in extra information or to join clauses together. So for example, before she went to school, before is the conjunction that allows us to join she went to school and Agatha walked her dog into one sentence. So before, that's a subordinating conjunction. Adds extra information to the main clause. Agatha walked her dog is the main clause. Before she went to school is a subordinating clause that gives extra information about Agatha walking her dog. Tells us when she did it. I love to eat vegetables, but I don't like eating fish. But here we've got is a coordinating conjunction. So there are two main clauses, and the but tells us they sort of contrast with each other in some way. So have a look at the setting description again and see if you can find the conjunctions. You can pause the video again whilst you try and find them. We have got whilst. On the grass, a majestic deer sipped from the crystal clear blue water, whilst fireflies swooped and sparkled all around. Tells us those two things happened at the same time. Whilst is the conjunction that allows us to join them. So here you go. Here in the different colours, we've got the different adjectives, fronted adverbials, conjunctions, powerful verbs. In pink, we've got adjectives. In red, we've got powerful verbs. In orange, we've got fronted adverbials. In purple, we've got the adverbial phrases. These typically in this one using similes. And in green, we've got the conjunctions. So have a little practice now of using fronted adverbials, adjectives and adverbs, powerful verbs, and conjunctions to improve these boring grey sentences. I've given you 5 grey sentences here. I'm calling them grey sentences because they're kind of dull and boring. They don't really include any of these lovely language features of description. So you can pause the video now and you can try and add in some fronted adverbials, powerful verbs, conjunctions, and adjectives and adverbs to describe each setting or each situation in more detail, make your description more powerful. Okay, so now you've had a little practice, it's time for you to try and write your own setting description. I'm going to show you some example settings that you can use, and I want you to try and use all the features that I've just talked to you about and write your own setting description. I will also give you a checklist that you can make sure you go back and check and look at to see have you included everything in it. So remember, when you're describing your setting, you're describing what you can see, hear, feel and smell in this particular place at the time in your story. So this is one option for a setting. You can pause the video now if you want to use this one. Here's another option for a setting. You can pause the video here if you want to use this one. Here's another option for a setting. So pause the video here if you want to use this one. And finally, here is another possible setting. So pause the video here if you want to use this one for your setting description. Okay, here is a checklist of things you can use to check through your setting description and make sure you have included all of these different details. Have you described what can be seen, heard, felt, and smelt? Have you described the most important and obvious details first, with the smaller, more specific details coming later? Have you started your sentences using fronted adverbials to tell us where, when, how, or why the verb happened? Have you used powerful verbs and adjectives to describe the nouns, and adverbs to describe the verbs? And have you used conjunctions to join clauses together? So if you can do all of those, and you can write a detailed descriptive setting description. I hope that's useful.